We're looking at a map of Selangor here, and this is basically the state assembly seats that we see here. Large one like Hulu Selangor is the size of Malacca apparently. I think for many people who live in Selangor or many Malaysians, we don't quite understand why and how boundaries are drawn and how they change over time. Maybe you could just sort of enlighten us on that.
Yeah, so boundaries are dictated and drawn approximately every 10 years. Right in the beginning, when we first had our first elections in 1955, before independence actually, we had 52 parliamentary seats that were drawn more or less without knowing the population of the various states. They were drawn by the British administrators at that time, and we had our first elections in 1955 based on those. And what happened in 1959, in our first parliamentary elections after independence, was that those 52 seats were separated into two, and we had 104 parliamentary seats.
And it was arbitrary at that point?
Yes, rather arbitrary, because they didn't know the number of voters in each constituency. They more or less guessed, but it wasn't very accurate. And we did not have a delimitation exercise until 1974. There was one proposed that in 1961 by a very independent election commission chairman. But because the configurations were not favorable to the Barisan National Government at that time, that plan was basically shelved.
Okay, that was the Alliance Coalition.
Yes, the Alliance Coalition at that time. Yep. So after May 1969, we had our first delimitation exercise, and in that delimitation exercise, there was an explicit impetus to redraw the boundaries and also to increase seats to overrepresent the Malay voters. There is a provision in the Constitution which says you can give rural weightage so that the size of the rural seats bigger in size area but are smaller in terms of number of voters. But I think starting from 1974, this disproportionality basically increased over time.
Right. So this is a question of how a single MP can manage a space, right? For instance, Hulu Selangor being the size of Malacca means just one MP for this whole area, right? But population densities perhaps are not reflected. We don't really know how they're distributed over the space. One of the things that I think that is central to the question of delimitation is the principle of one man, one vote. I mean, essentially, the whole system hinges on us keeping true to that principle, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So you want to have a system that's ideally as close to that principle as possible, whereby you don't get seats with, let's say, theoretically, 10,000 voters in one parliamentary seat, and then another seat having 100,000 voters, which means that one vote in that seat with 10,000 is actually worth 10 times the vote in the seat with 100,000 voters. So we want to keep to that. We don't want this situation. We want a situation where the number of voters in each constituency is more or less the same.
I mean, there are people who have been arguing for electoral reform. One of the issues is this principle. Do you think, in the general assessment, that this principle has been adhered to more than not?
I think it's not been adhered to since 1974. There were past restrictions or maximum deviations that you could have from some sort of average, but those were never followed. After 1957, there was supposed to be a 15% maximum deviation from some sort of either a state or a national average. That was never followed. Later, that was relaxed to the size of the smallest constituency could be half that of the largest constituency. That was also subsequently abolished. So now you have a situation where the smallest seat is Putrajaya with about 10,000 voters, and the largest seat is a seat in Kapa in Selangor with 140,000 voters.
Now, who do we blame for this? Is it the election commission or is it the government of the day? I mean, whose responsibility is it been to oversee this process and make sure that the one man, one vote principle is adhered to?
I would say that the election commission is in charge of this process, but given the fact that this process ultimately has to be passed in Parliament, the election commission knows who is the one that they have to quote-unquote obey or get the approval of, and that would be the Barisan National Government. So I would say both of them are to be blamed for not adhering to this one man, one vote principle.
Now, just looking at the state of Selangor, I mean, do we have any facts about that? In a report that was published some years ago now, it says that the population of Selangor doesn't match its representation in Parliament, that in fact Selangor is underrepresented in the National Assembly. Would that be true still today?
It would still be true because Selangor has the largest number of voters in the entire country. It has currently about 2 million voters, and it only has 22 parliamentary seats. If you compare it to a state like, let's say, Sabah, which is a bigger than Selangor, yes, but it also has 25 parliamentary seats, even though it has only 1 million voters. So definitely, I would say Selangor as a whole has always been underrepresented, and I think it has become more underrepresented over time because the number of newly registered voters in Selangor and those who have transferred in have increased significantly over time.
Okay, you mentioned earlier the question of the ethnic composition of seats and how that plays out in terms of political issues, how ultimately who wins the game. Now, what do we understand about the ethnic compositions in the state of Selangor? Do we have mostly seats that are mixed, or do we have seats that are predominantly one ethnic group? At least in Malaysia, I guess the main communities would be the Chinese and the Malay community that would form big majorities. What do we find in Selangor?
So Selangor is one of the more mixed states in Malaysia. The population breakdown, the voter breakdown is about 50-50. You have 50% Malay, 50% non-Malay. Out of the 50% non-Malay, you have about 35% Chinese voters, about another 13% Indian, and then 2% others, include some Orang Asli as well. So Selangor actually is a very mixed state, and I think given the fact that you have a lot of mixed areas in Selangor, there is no particular place where you will have over 90% Malays, for example, or over 90% Chinese, which you would find in places like KL. So on the whole, it's actually a pretty mixed state.
And that means for political parties, they have sent out a message that appeals across the board. It cannot be too driven to in the interest of one community or the other. Would that be the consequence of mixed constituencies?
Yes, that means that you could not be focusing your efforts just to appeal to voters from one ethnic constituency.
Now, in a recent video interview that we did with the former Menteri Besar of Selangor, he said that one of his big regrets was a delimitation exercise in 2003 where they created more mixed constituencies. At that point, perhaps the expectation was that the Barisan Nasional actually does much better in mixed constituencies than it does when they either have to contest majority Chinese or majority Malay seats. What happened in 2003?
Yeah, I think that was a reaction to the events in 1999, whereby PAS made great inroads, especially in Terengganu and Kedah, in the Malay majority seats. So in the 2003 delimitation exercise, it not just affected Selangor, but also other states in Malaysia, especially in Kedah as well, whereby there was sort of like an instruction to the Election Commission from above to draw more mixed seats. Because the non-Malays in these mixed seats are much less likely to vote for PAS, compared to the Malays in these areas. So that was perhaps what the former Menteri Besar of Selangor was referring to.
But he says it's actually been it didn't work out for the Barisan Nasional. He feels that in many ways this came back to cause their defeat in 2008. Would that be true?
Yeah, I think in any delimitation exercise, when you draw the lines not based on principles, but based on political rationale of that period of time, you always run the danger of the political circumstances changing, and your decisions made at point X will come back to haunt you in point Y. That actually happened to the BN, not just in Selangor, but also in Kedah. Because in Kedah, you have about 25% non-Malay voting population there. And there were many seats that were redrawn in the 2003 delimitation exercise to include more Chinese and more Indians. They never expected the Indians and the Chinese in Kedah and also in Selangor to start voting massively in favor of PAS and even keadilan. That was exactly what happened in 2003. and 8 in Kedah, as well as Selangor and in many other places in Peninsular Malaysia as well.
Okay, since 2003, there hasn't been a delimitation exercise. And why is that?
Yeah, actually, the process usually starts about 8 years after the previous delimitation exercise, and once the process starts, it needs to be completed within 2 years. So the next delimitation exercise should have, under usual circumstances, started around 2011, 2012. The reason why the Election Commission hasn't started this process is because for the first time in Malaysian history, the Barisan Nasional doesn't control 2/3 majority, and that actually affects whether the delimitation exercise can be passed smoothly in Parliament or not.
So this process would include surveying voter populations, understanding how things are administered, perhaps, or changing administrative lines, and also in the case of without a 2/3 majority, negotiating with your rivals, with the party in opposition.
Yeah, this becomes a very, very complicated exercise because even though you need only a bare majority to pass the exercise at parliamentary level and the state level, usually every single delimitation exercise we've had in the past, and there have been 4 since we've achieved independence in 1974, 1994, 1984, 1994, and then 2003, the Barisan Nasional have always controlled 2/3 majority as well as a majority in all the important states. Right now, they don't have that. And also, Pakatan controls 4 states and has veto power in another 2 states. So it's going to involve a very tricky negotiation process on both sides, which I think the Election Commission doesn't want to deal with at this point in time.
Well, but is it healthy for democracy to have that negotiation process?
Yes, I think it is, because I think it ensures that one side cannot just write roughshod over the other, and they need to negotiate based on certain principles that both sides can agree with.
Okay. Can we look at some of the constituencies that maybe would interesting, that demonstrate some principle or some problem that we have?
Yeah, I think in Selangor it's going to be a very interesting case because Selangor it currently has 10 parliamentary seats with more than 100,000 voters. There are only 2 other parliamentary seats outside the state of Selangor that has more than 100,000 voters. One is in Johor, one is in Negeri Sembilan. So there is definite pressure or need to increase the number of seats in Selangor. So for example, in this seat of Kappa P109 that's near Klang, you currently have about 140,000 voters there. So definitely there's a need to perhaps break up this seat into 2, or break up this seat and then combine it with another seat. There's also another seat in Sedang that has about 130,000 voters, and also here in Puchong, over 100,000 voters, but it has the distinction, Sri Sedang, of being the largest state seat in the entire country. Currently, there are 71,000 voters in this state seat, which actually means that this state seat has more voters than probably 70% of the parliamentary seats in Malaysia.
Right. Just to wrap up, do you think that the exercise in 2003, the lack of an delimitation exercise since then, is going to affect how the game at this point, the upcoming general elections? Do you think, just coming back to Hitoyo's point, that this will still be a problem for the Barisan Nasional, or is it even for both sides?
I think it still is a problem for Barisan Nasional because Pakatan Rakyat now is much stronger in the mixed seats compared to the BN. So it is a classic case of not keeping to principles but drawing lines according to political expediency, and that coming to bite you in the butt later.
Okay, thank you very much.